Welcome to the Big Fundamental Podcast. This is a very different version of the podcast you are used to. We're live on YouTube right now. We'll be live in a few hours too for the draft, but we're getting a little head start. Cameron's here with me. I'm Jackson. We're the Kins 5 digital team because bombs are dropping early.
Yeah, a big trade already happening before the NBA draft. Obviously, this comes in the wake of the big Anthony Davis trade. There's been a handful of other trades, and the big news that happened literally in the last 10 minutes or so, the number 4 pick that the Pelicans got from the Lakers in that Anthony Davis trade, they're now trading that to the Hawks in exchange for the 8th pick, the 17th pick, and also the 35th pick, which is a second rounder.
Man, so I mean, Atlanta had been kind of in the talks of shopping. They had 2 picks in the top 10, kind of shopping one or both of those around to kind of acquire more assets. They're moving up here in the draft. ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski is reporting they're interested in DeAndre Hunter with that number 4 pick. What do you think that adds to the Hawks team here?
It makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of guys on that team who are really young. They've really built super young. And again, with this trade, they'll still have 10 if the reporting here is right. So they'll have 4 and then 10. And they basically 2 of their best players last year were rookies. And so by bringing in a guy who is going to be a rookie, and Hunter, assuming that's who they pick, he's an experienced guy. Really what people are saying about him, and we'll talk about this a lot over the course of the podcast today.
For sure.
Low ceiling versus high ceiling, high floor versus low floor. And a lot of times when you're talking about choosing a 19-year-old, there's a high ceiling. They could be really good, or in a low floor. They might not actually end up being that good at all. Some of the more experienced guys who are coming into the draft, you sort of know how good they can be. It's a lower ceiling, but a higher floor, meaning right away they're going to come in and be closer to an NBA level.
Yeah, and Hunter's been touted as someone who could be an immediate contributor. Maybe not a future superstar, maybe not a future All-NBA player, but not every team needs every pick to be an All-NBA player. Now, for the Pelicans here, new GM David Griffin comes into the situation where he's got a begrudge, I guess a disgruntled star in Anthony Davis who is demanded a trade, so it comes some back and forth between the teams there. He takes that star, turns it into Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, and this 4 pick, and then turns that 4th pick into the 8th pick, into the 35th pick, into another first-round pick for this team, acquiring assets in the middle of a rebuild. I mean, that's a job well done by him. If that's the goal, is to get assets for a future team here, start rebuild around a superstar in Zion Williamson. Great job by him there.
Yeah, it's not always the best idea to have. If you're going to have the number 1 pick, you want to surround him with other guys who can really help his game grow and flourish. And yeah, you want to have some other young talent around him, see if you can develop somebody else. But to try to get 1 and 4 is just always going to be really tough. The kind of guy who gets drafted at number 4, you kind of has that expectation of being a star. Mm-hmm. And even though we've talked about this draft kind of being a 2 or 3 person draft, there's a little bit of that drop off there in the once you get past 3, 4, and into 5 or so. You might run into some problems, some chemistry problems with a guy who says, hey, on any other team, I would be a featured rookie on a team that wasn't very good last year. Now I'm definitely second fiddle to Zion Williamson with really not too much of a chance of moving up. Zion Williamson is going to be the guy in New Orleans for 7 years, presumably.
I mean, so we're seeing, kind of going into this draft, like you mentioned, number 4 seemed to be where the fireworks could start happening. Number 1, number 2, number 3 seemed locked in between Zion Williamson going to the Pelicans, Ja Morant going to the Grizzlies, and RJ Barrett to the Knicks. And now we're seeing those fireworks happen. But that's not the only deal that's happened so far today. Why don't you tell us about this Indiana Pacers trade?
Yeah, so the Indiana Pacers are trying to, they picked up TJ Warren, and it's an interesting salary cap kind of move. He brings in a little bit of a salary coming from Phoenix, but it also, I think, allows them to kind of move some things around. I think they're sort of assuming at this point Bojan Bogdanovic is going to be gone from there. Mm-hmm. He's a guy who the Spurs have been linked to and interested in. He also would be a great fit on the Lakers, playing next to LeBron James as a real floor spacer. So the Pacers, who before Victor Oladipo went down with an injury last year, they were a really interesting competitive team, but people were saying maybe they had kind of hit their ceiling. So you bring in another guy, bring in a talent. I really like TJ Warren's game. I think he's very talented. He's been sort of the wrong system in Phoenix for a while. And see what he can do to sort of elevate your floor and your ceiling.
Now, is the system in Phoenix right for anybody? Who knows? But I don't think this is going to be the last trade that we hear about before the draft. I'm sure there's going to be more fireworks during the draft as well, more bombs dropping. Anything that you think we should be looking forward to in the next kind of hour and a half, 2 hours here before the draft comes?
Well, the Spurs, I think, are a dark horse. I think a lot of media hasn't really looked at them as a potential option. But here's the thing: we saw some reports in the last couple days that the Spurs are probably going to re-sign Rudy Gay. If that's the case, and they do re-sign Rudy Gay, and they keep both of their first-round picks at 19 and 29, and assuming neither of those picks are draft and stash guys who stay over in Europe, they only have one more roster spot to play with this summer. So I think the Spurs, if they're not looking at guys who they want to draft and stash, and again, you're playing a little bit of a risk, assuming I think the only draft and stash guy who's first round is Samanic. You're playing a little bit of a risk to assume he's still going to be there at 29. If you draft who you want at 19, you get to 29 and that guy's not there, then you're in some trouble. You need to try to scramble and make some trades. I think the Spurs could be looking to move up with those 2 picks plus their second rounder, try to move up a little bit. Not only get a guy who's a little bit better than what you get at 19, but also then not have to have 2 rookies on your roster for a team that's probably trying to compete right away. And you're going to have a little bit. You'll have the cap space and try to go after 2 guys instead of just potentially the 1 roster spot that would be left. Because otherwise, you can only have 15 guys when the season opens. And the Spurs, with Rudy Gay, they're at 12 right now already for next year.
Yeah, all of this kind of signals that this Spurs team is still in win now mode. If they were going to build towards a future, if they were in the process of a rebuild or thinking 3 years ahead, they'd probably hold on to both those picks. They'd probably let Rudy Gay go and try to start thinking about, a prime year, kind of prime DeJounte Murray 3 years in the road and kind of add some people who could play around him. But that's not the case here. And we've talked about this before. Greg Popovich isn't going to want to do a rebuild in what could be the last 2 or 3 years of his career. He's kind of winding down here. So it'd be interesting to see what they do to kind of make some room here, either some more veterans, trading some of these picks here to kind of open up some more roster spaces. Whether it's Bojan Bogdanovic or whether it's someone else, we're going to have it all covered for you here with the Big Fundamental Podcast. And later on today, as the draft kind of continues here, unfolds here, the Spurs are, kind of as Cameron said, expected to be players, whether it's through trading, whether it's through drafting, all 3 picks they have. We'll be here live on YouTube breaking down the entire draft from a Spurs perspective, from an NBA perspective, and kind of give you our our philosophies on how these teams are doing, our breakdown of the draft as well. Looking forward to it. It's going to be a wild ride. This is not the end of things aren't going to be calm from here on out.
No, we have one eye on the NBA draft this whole evening. We'll be definitely on by the time the Spurs are making their first pick, and we'll be kind of standing by in case any big Spurs news happens. We'll be jumping on, ready to go, and bring you that news right here on Ken's 5.
Actually, awesome. Yes, I mean, if you have any questions, feel free to tweet Cameron Songer, Jackson Floyd, or also put your comment in the YouTube section. We'll be following along with that as well. We'd love to hear your thoughts as well. So thank you so much for joining us as we break down the early moves heading into the draft, giving you a preview. We'll be back here as the draft gets underway. Awesome. Thank you, guys.